In this video, we see how the Neath-Port Talbot Council Planning Development Manager Steve Ball has grossly misrepresented the role of Natural Resources Wales in the planning process for the Glynneath development. During the Planning Committee meeting of 8th September 2020, the Planning Development Manager Steve Ball misrepresents the role of Natural Resources Wales at the Glynneath development. We believe that the reason he does this is to provide the Planning Committee with a sense of lawfulness for the development and in particular the illegal tipping habits of the Cuddy group. In effect, he is attempting to cover up Neath-Port Talbot Council Planning Department malpractice which allowed the Cuddy group to tip contaminated waste unlicensed for the majority of, if not all, of the 13 years the Cuddy group tipped at the site. The Cuddy group's first approved plans were in 2005. If we look at condition 26 of the planning permission, we will see that the importation of material was only allowed for 12 months after the commencement. However, the Cuddy group tipped for the majority of the 13 years at the site after this permission, 12 of which, based upon condition 26, were illegal, and the Neath-Port Talbot Council have refused to provide evidence that the Cuddy group submitted a commencement notice which would suggest that during the complete ownership of the site by the Cuddy group, they tipped illegally from 2005 to 2017. This being the case, Neath-Port Talbot Council are guilty of malpractice for allowing this to happen. Let's return to the 2020 meeting to see how Steve Ball misrepresented the role of Natural Resources Wales at the Neath-Port Talbot Council Planning Committee meeting. At 1:21:35, he said that the Cuddy group brought on a significant amount of material which was at that time necessary to facilitate the development to create the landform necessary for that approval. It had a Natural Resources Wales licence, a permit to bring the land on. 20 seconds later, he states that the land needs to be brought off the site, which may seem unusual, but is clearly to the benefit of the development.
The site itself, this is actually a Google image, sorry, this isn't one I took recently, this is an older one with the old Cuddy sign on. It gives an idea about the stockpile that built up over the years in the middle of the site, which is referred to on page 20. Ultimately, for the previous consent, it was Cuddy Group who had the consent, and they did bring on a significant amount of material, which was at that time necessary to facilitate the development and create the landform necessary for that approval. That has been brought onto the site. It did have a Natural Resources Wales licence from them, a permit to bring the development of the land on in terms of inert material being brought on. And as a consequence, it was being moved around here and there, but largely you do have a stockpile which has effectively assimilated itself into the landscape slightly because it's had lots of, effectively its vegetation has grown on top of it. But that stockpile is still within the site and will need to be moved around. And indeed, as you'll note in the development, because of the changes to the levels that we have negotiated, actually quite a large amount of material that was brought onto a site will actually now have to be brought off of the site, which may seem unusual, but actually is clearly to the benefit of this development, in our opinion.
This information ties in with the local residents' view, photographic evidence and historical evidence that the Cuddy group never intended to build houses on the site. The planning permission was a front for their demolition and asbestos waste business. The Cuddy Group housing brand, Primrose Homes, failed to build a single house during the entirety of their existence. The Cuddy Group were at one point during their ownership of the site identified as the 12th largest demolition company in the world. If we look at the activities of the specialist house builder Enzo, we will see that the first thing they did was to remove the tipped material from the site. They even broke the planning conditions to do so, which would suggest that the removal of the earth was a priority action. During the planning committee meeting, a representative of the residents informed the committee of this Cuddy group practice. He stated that the cost of planning was a loss leader for Cuddy, who made far more money from tipping on the site. Steve Ball references the Natural Resources Wales licence again at 2 hours and 21 into the meeting. He says that the Cuddy group were bringing on the material which was inert, and there were allegations that the developer did more than that, which are definitely unproven.
That's correct, yes.
Okay, that's right.
Chair.
Yes, sorry.
If I may just add very briefly to that.
Oh,
I mean,
Mr. Ball, right.
sorry, as I said in the presentation, I mean, there was a Natural Resources Wales licence for the importation of this material, which would have been inert material. I know there's been allegations that the developer did more than that they are definitely unproven allegations.
The planning officer has no way of knowing whether or not the materials the Cuddy group brought onto the site were inert or not. Neath-Port Talbot Council did nothing to regulate the Cuddy group, and the tested soil provides evidence to the contrary. Using the term inert is a deliberate fabrication of information by Steve Ball. The term definitely unproven is also a fabrication of information. If we look at the history of the site, we will get some idea of the tipping habits of the Cuddy group. From around the late 1930s, the site was a municipal ash tip landfill site. This eventually became privately owned, and in 1999 we can see that the land has been cleared and quarried to a certain extent, with part of the historical ash having been removed from the site, leaving in some places a depression 20 metres lower than the natural ground level. By 2004, the Cuddy group had filled the depressions, and the stockpile central to the development had started to take shape. The activities of Cuddy group were a nuisance to the residents bordering the site. Burning material on site was a regular occurrence. Residents reported this to the council or the Environment Agency, but the Cuddy group blamed the local children for setting alight the trees. The area had always been a local haunt for children, the stream and woods providing opportunities for catching tadpoles and building dens. However, the actions of the Cuddy group turned the area into a danger zone. Around this time, Jordan Beale, aged 9, was playing on the site and building dens out of the materials newly found there. One day, Jordan and his friend arrived home with a fridge door. It became illegal to dump fridges and freezers in UK landfill sites on the 1st of January 2002. The fridge door Jordan brought home was dumped illegally and is classed as hazardous waste. In 2005, the Neath-Port Talbot Council approved their first set of Cuddy group plans. If we look at the 2006 image, we will see that a stockpile is already formed. If we look at the different colour material being tipped at the site and the debris amongst the tipped material, we will see that there is no structure to the tipping. It is believed that the old Neath General Hospital had already been tipped here, and the Cuddy group are also bringing in waste from the old BP Llandarcy site. In the photos, we see upward gradients and piles of tipped material throughout the site showing the stockpile. And if we make a comparison between 1999 and 2006, we will see that there is a marked difference in the site levels, and the tipped material is being moved towards the floodplain in the southeast corner. This is important to note because in 2008 the land was tested as contaminated above safe levels in 4 out of 6 testing locations, including the new tipped area towards the southeast corner. These locations can be seen circled in this illustration. The Cuddy group submitted this information to the Neath-Port Talbot Council, and it can be found on the Planning Information website today. 3 contaminants were identified above the safe level. 2 of these contaminants were Grade 1 classified carcinogens: arsenic, benzoapyrene and zinc. A risk assessment and remediation strategy was included with this information. the geotechnical report submitted to Neath-Port Talbot Council provided evidence that the land should be remediated, that is, cleaned up because of the danger to human health. This is clear evidence that Steve Ball's term, definitely unproven, is a fabrication of information. He does this to cover up the planning department malpractice relating to contaminated land that is detailed below, which states that the land should have been remediated early in the planning process. One of the key objectives of the Council's contaminated land strategy, Key Objective 4, is to ensure that during the redevelopment of new sites, land contamination issues are dealt with effectively and at an early stage in the planning process. So what should have happened is that the Cuddy Group should have then cleaned up the site as required by the polluter pays principle, detailed in the Council's contaminated land strategy. But what actually happened is that the Cuddy Group withdrew the plans containing this information, and the next set of plans were approved on the 23rd of April 2010. The conditions did not mention contamination or chemical testing, and there is no record of any remediation on the site. The Cuddy Group changed the status of the site to brownfield, and the planning department complied with this deception by not questioning the change in land status. The contaminants were left on the site, and the safety recommendations to protect Glynneath residents from contamination were ignored. Planning department malpractice has endangered the lives of Glynneath residents. The summary of information. If we refer to Steve Ball's Natural Resources Wales comments, and in particular, there were allegations that the developer did more than that, which are definitely unproven, we will see that the Cuddy Group brought contaminated soil onto the site. Neath-Port Talbot Council were informed of this in 2008. This information is contained on the Neath-Port Talbot Council Planning Department website. Therefore, this statement by Steve Ball is a deliberate attempt at deceiving the Planning Committee. If we return to the site history, we will see from the photographic evidence and also resident testimonies that the Cuddy Group continued to tip at the site once the 2010 plans were passed. In 2013, we can see several piles of tip material on the site. It is important to note the amount of material already brought onto the site and the already identified contamination, because 2013 saw the formation of Natural Resources Wales. It is therefore impossible for the Cuddy Group to have tipped with a Natural Resources Wales licence prior to this date. And on the 15th of August 2014, we see that for the first time the Cuddy Group obtained a Natural Resources Wales licence to tip on the site. At about this time, we see a change in the tipping habits of the Cuddy Group. They tip more at night and were also seen using their machines to dig holes, tip material into the holes, then fill over the top, suggesting, of course, that they did not want whatever they tipped to be discovered. This suspicious activity can be seen in the following three satellite images. Image 1 shows the Cuddy machine busy at work. Image 2 shows recently disturbed ground in two isolated spots in the tipped area. Image 3 shows machine tracks to these isolated locations. This information was reported to Glynneath Councillor Del Morgan in 2017, the Neath-Port Talbot Council Planning Department in March 2020, the Contaminated Land Officer at Neath-Port Talbot Council and Natural Resources Wales in July 2020. Back in 2016, the spoil tip on the Cuddy site was reaching Aberfan proportions, and a residents' group was formed to safeguard the properties bordering the site. The residents informed Neath-Port Talbot Council Planning via Councillor Eddie Jones that the Cuddy Group were using the housing development as a cover for their tipping operations. Neath-Port Talbot Council placed an enforcement order on the Cuddy Group to prevent them tipping further. In 2017, the Cuddy Group confirmed this by submitting plans to tip another 5 metres higher. These plans were refused. Nigel's property overlooks the site and he takes up the story.
For the last 18 years since I lived here, obviously the back garden, also the back of the house, is overlooking the tip as I'm on top of Brynhyfryd Hill. I get out several times in the night to use the toilet, and I've seen in the past a number of lorries dumping in the pitch dark. Also at one time with Cuddy and Company, they kept a machine over there. Obviously by day the man would turn up and bury everything. I've also been over there for a walk around early in the morning. I've seen large metallic barrels, asbestos, and everything thrown there.
Elaborate on the asbestos, Nigel.
Oh,
Are you familiar with asbestos?
Yes, I've had it removed from the house over the years. These are broken down bits which have been pushed down into the ground.
And the barrels were on top of the ground, not in the ground?
Yes. They were left there until the man turned up about 8, and I think he worked till about 2 or 3. And obviously they were pushed down into the ground, and then you'd have more lorries by day. Generally they'd work in the summer. Don't ask me where they come in from. They'd be filling up, raising up the tip, but burying all the waste underneath.
And how far are you away from these barrels when you were looking at them?
Oh, well, I walked up the hill,
So
onto the tip, give them a kick. I could feel.
So you actually kicked the barrels, yeah?
They weren't
Yeah.
empty,
Yeah.
They were full.
The Cuddy Group went bankrupt and the site was sold to Enzo Homes. There is no evidence that the Cuddy Group attempted to build homes at the site in the 13 years since they first obtained planning permission to do so. Only the Cuddy Group knows what the Cuddy Group tipped on the site. We've seen how Steve Ball has misrepresented the role of Natural Resources Wales in relation to the site at the Planning Committee meeting in September 2020. Materials had been tipped on site by the Cuddy Group since 2005, and the first Cuddy licence from Natural Resources Wales dates from August 2014. But even though the Cuddy Group are tipping with a Natural Resources Wales licence, they are still breaking the planning conditions, which state that they should only tip from 12 months onwards from a specified date which the Cuddy Group should have notified the Planning Department of. Neath-Port Talbot Council refused to provide evidence of a date of commencement for the Cuddy Group tipping. The Cuddy Group tipped under a Natural Resources Wales licence is a historical stance which Steve Ball has taken with us since April 2020. And as we have seen the information presented on this video, it is a misrepresentation of the truth. Summary. If we refer to all available images of the Hale o' Glynn site during the period 1999 to 2017, we will see that the Cuddy Group made no attempt at building houses. There is no groundwork, no infrastructure such as roads or drainage. What we see is exactly the opposite. The Cuddy Group were making the land unfit for a housing development site by tipping unregulated, contaminated waste on the site. Neath-Port Talbot Council are aware of this and are attempting to cover up their malpractice and negligence. We have seen how the planning official Steve Ball has attempted to legitimise the Cuddy Group's operations by misrepresenting the role of Natural Resources Wales. Prior to the release of this video, we provided members of the Planning Committee and other council officials, including the Head of Planning and Public Protection, Kerry Morris, the option of providing counter-evidence for Steve Ball's corruption, but they have failed to respond to this email. Neath-Port Talbot councillors continue to support the corrupt actions of Steve Ball and his planning department colleagues.